Dragon Ball isn't a deep anime for me, but when I lived in the countryside, I was just a little kid and there weren't any other anime shows. Dragon Ball influenced me a lot, and it definitely impacted me in many different ways. Back then, all I cared about were the fights. I just wanted to see the combat. I wanted to see the clashes between the characters, between the Z fighters. But looking back at that time more deeply, Dragon Ball really did impact me because there were scenes of death, of loss, of hopelessness, of moments of rage. So thinking about it today, I realized that back then, this anime, which isn't all that deep, was already affecting me. And now, watching Dragon Ball again as an adult, I realize it impacted me more than I ever imagined. After I became an adult, my brain now pays more attention to certain things that I didn't notice before, unconsciously. It's not even something I can choose. And Vegeta, in this universe, he's incredibly important, not just for the story itself, but for us as well. I dare to say that Dragon Ball wouldn't be the same without him. And the two things the character made me reflect on the most, both during my childhood when I first watched it, and now, were two fundamental factors in human life: ego and redemption. Vegeta is the son of King Vegeta, and from a young age he was a character with a lot of expectations placed on him. He was always heavily praised as a child, and that really shaped his personality. On top of that, there's a bitterness to the character regarding the abuse his race suffered at the hands of Frieza. His home planet, Planet Vegeta, imagine having a planet with your name, was destroyed, and that made his hatred for Frieza grow even stronger. And Frieza also ended up having a certain influence on his behavior. So here we have a character who was influenced by Frieza, and that explains a lot. Vegeta is a sadistic character during his first appearances. He has no attachment or pity for anyone. He's extremely arrogant thanks to his upbringing and also due to his enormous power, which is far above average. Everything revolves around his own self-interest. He even kills his own companion Nappa. In this first part of the anime, it's as if he's the only one that exists, nothing else. He also believed that his race was superior to all others, and this made him respect only beings like himself, the Saiyans. Vegeta's sadism can be heavily influenced by his childhood experiences, and that's exactly what happened to him. In one study, it was shown that exposure to childhood trauma is prevalent among incarcerated youth and is associated with antisocial traits and behaviors. It has been proposed as a risk factor for developing sadistic traits, which has been shown to predict future violence in young people. Amidst all this perversity, Vegeta had a fixation on one character, Goku, who in every battle showed something superior to him. This created a motivation to surpass him, while at the same time generating a feeling of inferiority within him. Goku, indirectly, made the one who thought himself superior, precisely because of his race, confront his own inferiority, because this character's great weakness and strength is precisely his ego. Vegeta has a gigantic ego, and that can be very good in some respects. This gigantic ego can literally propel a person forward, even if it's in a false way. You'll see what I mean. When we have a big ego, we can push ourselves harder, precisely to maintain that idealized image. What happens with Vegeta, who trains a lot and puts in so much effort, precisely to maintain this image of being one of the strongest warriors in the universe? And many people use their ego in this way to advance in their careers, to develop themselves further. However, ego can make you quite vulnerable, even if you are one of the strongest Saiyans in the universe, as is the case with Vegeta. That's because there's a subtle difference between having a big ego and having a strong ego. When I feel that someone has a big ego, it implies that they are seen as someone who thinks they're important and superior to others. Having a big ego is also often associated with narcissistic traits, a superiority complex, and egocentrism. Vegeta. In other words, if a person has a big ego, it means they're very attached to the self, to mine. For Vegeta, at the beginning of the anime, it's almost as if no one else exists. We notice this in the way he looks down on the other Z warriors, especially the non-Saiyans. The term ontological addiction refers to a person's dependence on their own beliefs about the importance they attribute to themselves. This includes the extent to which they believe they exist at the center of the world, separate from everything and everyone around them. The theory of ontological addiction invites a new perspective on how modern science relates to the ego, as it implies that people who may not seem egotistical on the surface can still have a big ego. At first glance, Vegeta seems confident because of his big ego. That's true, but only when things turn out the way he imagines. This makes him completely dependent on external outcomes. When the results are different from what he expected, Vegeta feels really bad, as he mentions at certain moments. It's practically a feeling of shame and failure. I often say that a big ego is like a big animal. The bigger it is, the easier it is to hit. But the reason we really like Vegeta, and why you have so many conflicting emotions about him, is precisely because of the character's change. In the Namek saga, when you watch that saga, with those settings so different from planet Earth, at that time you notice that Vegeta was a bit different from before. He has the chance to kill Krillin and Gohan, but ends up forming an alliance with them. He had a common goal with Krillin and Gohan, which was to defeat Frieza, the being he hated the most, precisely because his people had suffered so much because of Frieza. The fight against Frieza is impactful in many ways. Just think back, and I remember when I was a kid, those moments when I watched the fight against Frieza, I was always afraid that some character would die. And Vegeta dies, and in his death against Frieza, Vegeta tells Goku that he never had another chance to be different. This is interesting because it could indicate that he had some positive qualities that were never revealed and were never nurtured by the environment he lived in. At that moment, Vegeta also reveals a deep resentment and hatred he felt toward Frieza, so much so that he asks Goku to defeat him. Well, and then we think, okay, if Vegeta is resurrected, he'll come back different. And in fact, he does come back, but it seems like he still has some similar behaviors. And that's how humans are. We tend to change when major things happen in our lives, but we also tend to return to our baseline. Anyone here who is religious probably goes to church at some point during the week. You leave church feeling totally energized, your faith renewed, and then as the week goes on, you start to forget about it. Several factors come into play. We go back to the basics, and Vegeta went back to the basics. But the main point is that he also experiences a change of environment. He is relocated to planet Earth and starts living there. Now it's his new home. He connects with someone, with Bulma, maybe the first person he genuinely connected with. Trunks is born from this unusual relationship, and even though Vegeta didn't want to admit it, this birth changes him completely, turning him into someone who now cares about people and wants something more. This is a milestone because it made Vegeta closer to the Earthlings than to his old origins. But one thing that doesn't diminish is his envy and feeling of inferiority towards Goku. Vegeta was raised to be the strongest Saiyan, and seeing Goku surpass him created a deep feeling of envy within him. Goku transformed into a Super Saiyan before he did. Goku defeated enemies that Vegeta couldn't beat. And when we feel inferior to someone else, we can't feel any sense of joy. We may not be able to find peace in that person's success. Researchers Smith and Van Dyke mentioned the German expression Glücksschmerz, which can represent a form of exchange as opposed to social comparison. For example, another person's gain or loss may be correlated with our own loss or gain. Therefore, Glücksschmerz is a reasonable reaction consistent with our own perceptions of injustice. So almost unconsciously, we may not really root for the success of people who are similar to us or for those in front of whom we feel some sense of inferiority. And then you might say, no, I don't feel that way. I root for everyone's success. Sports like soccer can reveal things about ourselves that we don't show on an individual level. If you have a team, you have a rival, and you get really happy when your rival loses. Your team could win everything, but if your rival loses, you might feel pleasure from that, and it's totally acceptable to share that feeling. If we feel this way about a group, about a team, it's very likely we feel the same about individuals, but we don't reveal it because it's not socially accepted. And soccer reveals many other things as well. When the opponent wins something, for example, we try to downplay that victory by saying either they didn't win fairly or it was because of this reason or that reason. We can't really praise our rival properly. And again, bring this to the individual level. Maybe this behavior repeats itself there too. But anyway, this is a complex subject. Vegeta started adapting to his environment, adapting to planet Earth. He started forming attachments, but always with that drive to train and fight. Vegeta is able to adapt. He actually develops genuine attachments. When Trunks is killed, we see his desperation. Even though he doesn't show that he cares, he doesn't like to show that he's attached to someone. And then, this is only broken again in the Majin Buu saga, where he gives himself over to Babidi to become stronger so he can face Goku and deal with this thing inside him, something he had kept bottled up for so long and could no longer hold back. But then, right after that, we see him sacrificing himself precisely to save the people who are important to him. And here we truly see how much he has changed. Neuroscientists have long studied how external signals influence behavior. Our brains are programmed to automatically respond to the stimuli around us, often bypassing conscious decision-making. This is where the basal ganglia, especially the striatum, come into play. This part of the brain is responsible for forming the habits, connecting what we see and feel with what we do. Vegeta's nervous system became calmer after being in this environment, and we see him balancing his family responsibilities with his training. A nervous system in protection mode can still function, but not optimally. Threat states burn energy more quickly, narrow our focus, reduce flexibility, and disconnect us from others. And Vegeta feels comfortable in this environment. Otherwise, he would have already left. This sense of calm, for example, this attachment to family, to purpose, to new meanings, can even increase his performance, as well as the performance of athletes. When we are in a constant state of alertness and lack purpose, we can feel more stressed. Calmness and connections change that. Physiologically, this reflects the regulation of the ventral vagal complex, which coordinates heart rate, breathing, and metabolism to match the moment. The body, when mobilized in a threat situation, operates under sympathetic dominance. Heart rate increases, muscle tension rises, and we lose flexibility. You need calm and to take steps back in order to keep making progress in something. And Vegeta's evolution is precisely about that. Now he seems like someone with greater well-being than before. These new people, his family, put him in a new perspective of meaning and purpose. The Polish psychologist Dariusz Krok illustrated this through a study that examined the protective relationships between sense of life and burnout in firefighters. According to Krok, the sense of life can prevent or reduce symptoms of burnout because it allows individuals to interpret and organize their experiences, identify important aspects of life, and achieve a sense of purpose and meaning. He found that firefighters with higher levels of personal meaning reported less emotional exhaustion and depersonalization, and greater personal accomplishment. And the last point, Vegeta developed flexibility over time. Before, he was very impulsive, and when someone is very impulsive, it also means their level of psychological flexibility is low. The Austrian psychologist Viktor Frankl postulated that between stimulus and response there is a space. In that space lies our power to choose our response. Vegeta had a huge ego, and by reacting to his internal emotions, he ended up acting very impulsively, which caused him to lose or get seriously injured in some fights. What makes this character truly great is precisely this complete 360-degree transformation he undergoes, from someone impulsive, selfish, and sadistic to someone who, while still retaining aspects of his personality, being competitive and emphatic, also incorporates other traits that bring greater balance to the character. And Vegeta is indeed more balanced, not just in Super, which unfortunately isn't as good as the others, but already by the end of Dragon Ball Z. The classic scene for me is during the fight against Majin Buu, where he fuses with Goku to defeat the enemy. That was terrible for him, having to join forces with the very person he most wanted to defeat, the one he envied the most. And there's also the iconic scene in Super, where he doesn't go train because he has to take care of his daughter. People change, priorities change, even for the Prince of the Saiyans. Controlling your impulses is an important step to getting closer to what truly matters to you. As Marcus Aurelius, who lived between 121 and 180 AD, once said, we must control not only unnecessary actions but also unnecessary thoughts so that unnecessary actions do not follow.